starting lineup of your favorite show. At producer, 5'11" from Blanchester, the Cow Killer, Casey McCollister. And comic engineer, standing at 4'8", the pride of the West Side, Broering. And your host, weighing 150 pounds, soaking wet, from Hamilton, Ohio, Ace Fowler.
Well, hey, what's going on? Welcome into Off the Bench. Nick Kirby, Craig Sandlin coming your way today as the normal Off the Bench crew is out at Prasco Park. They have the Joe Nuxall Classic today. Nick Kirby coming your way from Northeast Ohio. Craig Sandlin coming your way from Memphis, Tennessee. And we're talking Cincinnati sports because you could do that in 2024. Craig, how you doing?
I'm great, man. How are you? Happy Tuesday.
I am doing well. It helps when you put the people that are on the show into the show. But you know, hey, what? We're off to a roaring start here, as they say. Craig,
listen, we're holding this show together with like duct tape, dude. Like, let's not overpromise anything here, guys. If you can hear us, just accept it. Like, let's not act like this is some sort of top-notch production here, doing it from our respective offices. Like, it's the Tuesday after the national championship game. Let's have some fun. I mean, I know you guys had some fun last night on Chatterbox Reds with some trolls in the chat and online. I'm sure we'll do the same a little bit today. But lots of stuff to talk about on a relatively slow day. It's still a lot of stuff to talk about. We're gonna have a lot of fun and a lot of fun guests on the show today.
Yeah, and speaking of guests to kind of hold the show together today, Charlie Goldsmith coming up at 10:30, talking Reds, and Craig's going to ask him a few Bengals questions as well. And then Rick Broering coming up at 11. I got a million questions for Rick. I know I won't be able to get them all in, but we'll talk with Rick about the national championship. We'll talk about Cal because I know he's dialed into that. We'll talk Xavier, NKU, maybe even UC. We'll run through it all there. Craig, so yesterday, solar eclipse in where your neck of the woods, how close was it to you?
Yeah, we were 96% coverage, so not quite as full coverage as you got, but a still pretty cool experience to see. I had my daughter's school district didn't have school yesterday in order to, as they put it, allow the children to enjoy the eclipse. So woke up, realized that I was a terrible father and hadn't actually bought eclipse classes yet. So luckily, one of the biggest producers of those eclipse glasses, I guess, in the United States is actually based here in the Memphis area. So was able to stop by and get those and enjoy the 96% coverage. I got to say, I mean, it was pretty cool. I know, if I remember correctly, we had a solar eclipse back when I was in like elementary school. That was pretty close to totality. But I don't really remember a whole lot about it. I thought it was pretty cool. My daughter lost interest after about 3 minutes, but she'll enjoy it more when she's older. How about you and the kids?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty cool. I thought that, this is just going to be, some thing, whatever. And it exceeded my expectations. I thought it was neat. It was kind of eerie as we were like in the full shebang up here. It felt like War of the Worlds, like openings. That opening scene is there's like this weird like ring around it too that really kind of added to the whole intrigue. But yeah, it was cool. It was neat. I had a good time yesterday. So all right, but let's get into some sports. We'll start off with the national championship last night. I did not get to watch the first half because I was obviously doing Chatterbox Reds. By the time that I kind of got locked into the game, UConn, as they do just about every game, was steamrolling Purdue. What an incredible 2-year run from UConn. I don't know if I don't want to like go too far into hyperbole, but I just don't know if I've ever seen anything like this where they steamroll. You've seen some teams that have been really dominant, but usually there's one or two games where they're on the ropes or there's at least a little more intensity late in the game. It just did not happen at all this year for UConn.
Yeah, there's been two teams all time in NCAA tournament history that won all 6 of their games by 13 or more points. It was UConn this year and UConn last year. It's never been done other than those 2 years, and UConn did it the last 2 years. UConn outscored their opponents this year by 140 points over the course of 6 games. I mean, it was just a dominant run. It wasn't even, I don't think they weren't close in a single game realistically. And, it was, you got to tip your cap to Danny Hurley there and the job that he's done at UConn. We're obviously going to talk about the UK situation later on today. His name will certainly be thrown around. He's already come out and said that his plan is to stay at UConn and build a dynasty there. Not really sure how much more he has to do in order to formally build a dynasty, but I mean, absolute domination and quite frankly, did it with depth. He said it in the post-game interview that he went about it by recruiting a bunch of NBA guys who didn't care about getting the ball and being the highlight. And that really showed. I mean, Newton, who ended up being the most outstanding player, scored 20 points in the final. Zach Edey went out and scored 37. They let him do what he did. The game plan was to just let Zach Edey eat, and he did. 37 and 15 or something like that, if I remember correctly. But it was a really, really good performance by UConn all around. And I always am a fan of being able to get some of your bench players in at the end of games, allowing them to say that they played in the national championship game. So pretty cool experience for them as well. And tip of the cap to Matt Painter, who told UConn to run a play there at the end for those guys, and Danny Hurley just wouldn't do
it. UConn lost one game since Christmas. How insane is that? They actually got beat by 19 points to Creighton on the road, but I mean, they won 13 in a row to end the year. I mean, just an incredible, dominant stretch. Danny Hurley, somehow, I know Jay Wright really broke it down really good the other day. He doesn't get enough credit for, I think, his X and O execution. Like, the plays that he runs, I mean, it feels like they have a million options every time they come down the floor. There's no way to stop them. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Danny Hurley in the UK job. We'll talk about that more in a second. I do want to give a little bit more love to the actual championship game before we just rip apart the coach that won it. I do want to talk about Purdue though, because I do think that was an incredible story from them. Last year, the embarrassing loss to my mind's drawing a blank. The 16th seed. The Knights, yeah. Fairleigh Dickinson,
yeah.
Yeah. And for them to come back, it seems like if you lose to a 16 seed, you're guaranteed to go to the national championship game the next year. So that's kind of a cool trend going on. But credit to them. They had a lot of haters this year, that they're frauds and all of that. I think they proved, I would think, most of those people wrong. Getting to the championship game, having a really pretty dominant run of their own to get to the championship game, and then just getting beat by one of the better college basketball teams I think we've ever seen.
Yeah, I think realistically, if you would have asked a number of people at the beginning of the year, these are two of the best teams in the country from day one. And so ultimately the tournament did what it was supposed to do this year. It put the two best teams in the matchup for the national championship. It just so happened that UConn was exponentially better this year than seemingly everybody, and was hot for, as you said, the previous 3 months essentially. So Matt Painter has done an amazing job there at Purdue. We've talked about it on social media and other places, but he just has a knack at finding these unknown big guys and developing them into stars. That he did it with Zach Edey, who quite frankly didn't start playing basketball until his sophomore year of high school at IMG. He went to IMG, started his development there, and then Matt Painter brought him in. Zach Edey, again, somewhat relatively unknown. He was a 3-star recruit out of high school. He talked about it in his last post-game conference about how he was kind of overlooked. But Matt Painter just has this ability to find those big men and develop them. And he's been doing it for a number of years now, developing them into NBA big men. So, Zach Edey will be an interesting story to watch as the NBA draft approaches in the next couple months, and where he ends up, or if he ends up drafted. I mean, obviously the NBA is a little unique because there's only 2 rounds, but he's a guy that's going to get a chance. And if he continues to develop the way that he has, he's going to be competitive in the NBA and get quality minutes. So Matt Painter and Dan Hurley, despite the fact that they have 2 extremely different styles of coaching, and, watching them on the sidelines last night, you've got Danny Hurley, who's out there literally pushing his players mid-game, and Matt Painter, who seemed to not say a word the entire game. So very different styles, but 2 of the best coaches in the country, and they were on display last night.
It is fun how college basketball coaches, maybe feels like unlike any other sport, can just coach the game so differently, and both styles can get really good results. The tournament as a whole, Craig, I love March Madness. It's my favorite time of the year. The first weekend is the first 4 days are the best 4 days in the sports calendar. This year, especially, even more so, it feels like there's a letdown after that first weekend. And I know probably UConn's kind of just dominant, maybe adds to that a little bit. No disrespect to them, but, I do want to see more competitive games than, them having their historic run. And I'm sure that the baseball season starting in the Sweet 16 also added to that, especially as someone who does a daily Reds podcast. It kind of, it kind of really gets hard. It gets hard to shift gears back from one to the other. Do you feel like there's kind of a letdown after the first week? And I'm almost like the Final Four. It feels like I'm watching it more out of an obligation than an actual love.
Well, I think quite frankly, the first weekend you get all these upsets, and you get these teams who come in and make a ton of waves, and you've got, like we've seen in the past, 16s defeating 1s. And then the second weekend this year was literally all chalk. I don't think there was a single upset all weekend, it felt like. And so I think that takes away a little bit from what you're talking about and the kind of aura around this tournament. So much is built around the hype of those upsets and these last minute buzzer beaters. I don't think we got a single buzzer beater this year. I know Trace potentially was going to put a bet on that, so maybe he can confirm for us. But no buzzer beaters the entire tournament. Certainly some good games, but from that second weekend on, it didn't even feel like there were really a ton of super close games as they came down to the wire. I'm glad you brought it up, because my background in college athletics, I was always super close to the tournament and paying really close attention for multiple reasons. And now that I'm out of college athletics, I feel a little disconnected. And so I didn't know if it was just me that felt like the luster had dropped a little bit this year after the first weekend, or if it was just the games. And I do think that ultimately it was just the games didn't play out this year in a way that provided a ton of hype and exciting moments. Normally in one shining moment, we get a montage of buzzer beaters and last second shots. And it just, this year felt like a lot more celebrations and dancing than it did actually, exciting gameplay.
I also think the Final Four court kind of adds to it. Like, it just does not feel like college basketball when you're playing in front of 70 or whatever, however many thousand people are there. And I'd have no interest to go to a game and sit a mile away. But it doesn't, the court, like, I get it why they do it. I mean, I know they make a lot of money and they draw a lot of people to wherever the city is, and that's a huge part of it. But it just, the court itself just almost, it doesn't feel like real college basketball to me.
You're never going to get away from it. There's too much money in the sport. I mean, I get it. I understand. We had some people on Twitter or X that was responding to me yesterday about the game and talking about the game should be played at a basketball arena. But if you can fit 4 times as many fans into an NFL stadium, it's just, the NCAA, whether people want to admit it or not, is a money-making organization, right? And so they're going to put those student athletes on the biggest stage and make the most money. And they sell it out every year. So it's not going to change anytime soon. That's for sure. But one of the other pieces that'll be interesting, and I think one of the things that'll play into it is the fact that it wasn't the greatest game this year, is that the women's basketball NCAA championship was the most viewed basketball event of all time, or NCAA basketball event of all time. Last year's men's game drew 14.69 million, and this year's women's game, as I pull it up real quick, over 18.5 million. So the women's game is really elevating to the next level, and there's a lot of talk from the NCAA standpoint of what that's going to mean overall for the financial model of that sport. They just signed a new contract with ESPN, and I apologize, it's the biggest basketball audience since 2019. But nonetheless, still significant. But Caitlin Clark and what she's done for the sport. And then you had a game last night that wasn't necessarily super close. So I ultimately think that the numbers, when they come in, will show that the women's game was more viewed than the men's game last night, which will also be interesting, and I'm sure send a lot of trolls into a spiral.
Well, it also just, I think, more so than, whether the men's game or the women's game or the style, whatever, it's that people know who Caitlin Clark is. Like, the casual sports fan has no idea who Tristan Newman is. They have no idea who Donovan Clingan is, right? I mean, they even know more the LSU players, like Angel Reese has more of a popularity than some of those players. I think that'll probably be something that swings back and forth. I think there'll be some men's players that really get a lot of notoriety and have a lot of name recognition and get a bigger following. But that is part of the whole NIL era. And I know UConn actually had a pretty decent amount of players that stayed for a while, but so many of these teams, and I guess Zach Edey is probably a different animal because he definitely has the right name recognition, but kind of more, he's used as a punching bag more than a hero to some, completely unfairly. But I do think in the NIL era that might be something that does hurt the sport a little bit.
Yeah, the NIL has certainly changed college athletics as a whole, and the way that it's not only able to recruit student athletes, but retain them, like you mentioned. And that's not going to go away. I mean, a big part of, Calipari's reported move to Arkansas as a guaranteed $5 million NIL package that he's going to be able to offer to players. So it's certainly a big piece for the student athletes and for the coaches. One of the other things that was brought up in the chat that I think is worth mentioning and getting your opinion on is the women's game started Sunday at 3 p.m. and the men's game started on a Monday night at 9:20 p.m. Eastern. There will be people who say that is too late and that there's, you can't do that, or, people can't stay up until 11:30 at night or whatever. I personally am up until midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, pretty much every night anyway. I know you are as well. But what's your take on just start time in general for this game? Obviously, West Coast, that's still only 6:20 p.m. Do you think the NCAA has a real option there in terms of how they handle that moving forward?
I mean, maybe you could look at doing, doing Thursday or doing Friday, Sunday, but either way, you're still going to have to play a night game. You have to play your final 4 games on a night. And remember, on Saturday, there's 2 games. So it's kind of, you have to have a day off in between unless you just completely change the whole structure of the Final Four. I think it's over exaggerated starting at 9:20 because people don't realize college basketball is a much shorter sport than any of the other sports. Every Sunday night, no one ever complains about the NFL game that starts at 8:20 p.m. that doesn't get over till 11:30, and it gets over the same time as these games do. So, like, I just think it's part of it. I think people are always going to complain about the start times. I just, there's not a good solution, and now the women, maybe they've kind of cornered that Sunday. You can't have both of them on the same day, right? So I think it's just kind of one of those things. It is what it is. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think if there was a game that really garnered a ton of excitement, had more storylines, they'd get the viewership, and I think it would be a fine situation. All right, let's talk about Dan Hurley. he kind of last night, at least the comments I saw, made it seem like he wasn't going to really consider the UK job, but he also didn't. He could have, straight poured water on any fire. It didn't feel like he did that as well. I mean, if you're UK, you have to go full guns a-blazing after Hurley, right? I mean, there's really no other option other than to go full speed at him, and then if you can't get him, you pivot. Did you agree with that?
He's got to be your first call, and you got to offer him like $10 million a year in order to come. You have to really put him in a position to really have to think about it long and hard. I think he's in such a good spot at UConn that he loves the East Coast. He's loved there. His style fits the environment there, both from personality type and basketball type. It's really hard to imagine a Danny Hurley style coach on the sideline at Kentucky, if I'm being honest. Yeah. As good as a coach as he is, it's hard to imagine. I think Rick Pitino had a little bit of fire in him back in the day, but nothing like Danny Hurley by any means. I actually thought that it was interesting that he made that comment about recruiting NBA players that don't care about sharing the ball after the game. It almost felt like a subtle dig to me to UK in the way that they've been recruiting. So I thought that was interesting. His quote for people that didn't see it is, quote, "Oh my God, Kentucky or anywhere that's going to take me further from New Jersey. I mean, we just went to Rhode Island, which I had to drag her to, and then to Connecticut. I got her closer, and now further. I can't afford a divorce right now. I just started making money." So, he's talking about his wife there. It's great quote, but at the same time, when you go to your wife and say, "Hey, they're offering me $10 million a year. Do you want to move farther from New Jersey, or do you want to stay here?" I don't know. I think my wife would certainly be open to the concept of living in Lexington for $10 million a year. But yeah, he's got to be your first call. He's got to be your second call. And quite frankly, he might be your third call as you continue to try and recruit him to come. But we'll talk about it later with Rick. This whole Cal situation has been really dragging out seemingly. News broke on Sunday night that the talks were really deep, and then there was a report of a players only meeting on Monday that apparently got canceled. And so I saw a local station down in Lexington who did find John Calipari as he was walking his dog. So he's in Lexington. He obviously turned down any comment, but this whole situation will be interesting to see how it plays out. We'll talk with Rick later today about it and who the next calls should be after Dan Hurley, because I do think that ultimately Dan will turn them down. And quite frankly, it feels a little bit like the coaching search drops off a cliff a little bit after Danny Hurley. Some of the names that have been out there are less exciting. And when you're talking about one of the top, I'll say 3 brands in college basketball, if not the top, it doesn't feel like there's clear-cut favorites after Danny Hurley of a coach that will take over that program and return them to the glory that UK fans really expect out of that program.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Danny Hurley's just such an interesting guy. He's so different than most other big coaches, just kind of his demeanor. I do feel like he's maybe calmed down a little bit. I mean, I'm probably winning 2 national titles, maybe calms anyone down a little bit. But it is going to be hard for him to replicate like this run. Like you don't win back-to-back titles. Usually there's a drop off. You saw a guy that comes to mind is Billy Donovan at Florida. Like they had those incredible, they won back-to-back, and then they were still good, but they had a drop off after that. So do you want that drop off to happen with the pressure of the Kentucky job, or do you want the drop off to happen where you've clearly built yourself a long runway because you just won 2 national titles?
Well, it's important that you brought up Billy Donovan. He's another name that's been brought up for this job, obviously. But the reason that Billy Donovan got out of Florida was because he hated the recruiting game. And that recruiting game is even worse now based on his preferences, right? So people like Brad Stevens, who I know Trace is high on, and some people in the chat have mentioned, Billy Donovan, who made the jump to the NBA. Like, I just don't see them getting back into the college game in today's era of NIL and the way recruiting goes. I think that both of those are really good coaches, really good basketball minds. We know that. I just don't see them getting into the grind of recruiting in NIL. There's, I know it's a different sport, but comparably, Deion Sanders has caught a lot of grief from the public because he doesn't travel to recruit, right? He sends his coaches out, brings people in on visits, but Deion doesn't leave campus. He's just there on campus. And so when you're talking about these guys who got out of the game because they didn't want to have to do that recruiting grind, it's really hard to imagine that they take a job like Kentucky where that's going to be your number one priority year in and year out, recruiting guys who can come in and compete for championships year one. And with the transfer portal and everything else, it just doesn't feel like Billy Donovan or Brad Stevens are going to be a fit for Kentucky as it stands today.
That's a good point on the new era of recruiting. I do think Billy Donovan would also be a really, really good candidate for this coaching job. The one guy that I think is under the radar is Mark Pope at BYU. Now, he doesn't have the name recognition of everyone else, but he's really built up that BYU program. I think his style would fit Kentucky very well. They run a fun offense. He's really personable. Now, he's not going to have the cachet of some of these other names that are out there, but if UK does have to, look elsewhere than Hurley or some of the other names like you mentioned, I do think Pope would be a pretty good fit for them, and a guy that could ultimately, get them back to where they want to be. But it's just going to be interesting with this Calipari situation. I understand both sides here. I understand why Calipari was upset that he didn't feel like he got the recognition that he deserved from the fan base. I think anyone that would be in his situation would feel that way after, kind of all that he's done. But I also get, why UK fans, when you lose to Oakland in the NCAA tournament, when you lost a couple years before that to the Peacocks. I mean, it gets frustrating, but it's going to be fascinating over the next 5 years to track where Arkansas goes and where Kentucky goes, because every single year they are going to be compared, and it's going to be great for the sport of college basketball, because I tell you what, I'm going to be glued to my TV when Arkansas and Kentucky play, and they're going to play at least once every year, maybe twice, maybe even 3 times.
Yeah, it's going to be Calipari's next visit to Rupp Arena is going to be something to withhold for sure, without a doubt. Going back to your original comment, Mark Pope was one of the first names that I thought of, and there's been a lot of people on social media saying that he's not a good fit. But you're talking about a guy who played at Kentucky, if I remember correctly, won a national championship there, has been a head coach now for almost 10 years, and at both programs has taken them to the next level and elevated them significantly. BYU was not a great basketball program when he took over there. Utah Valley, obviously, not exactly known to be a basketball powerhouse. So he's certainly coached well. And he's a guy that I think the UK faithful would actually embrace and want to support. It'll be interesting because you've got the one hand where people who only want national championship pedigree and they want someone who's proven it and able to get to Final Fours. But then you've got the potential of someone who can literally be your coach for the next 30 years, depending on how long he wants to coach, obviously, has UK ties, and is, a guy who is a program builder. And one of the knocks on Calipari is that the way that he recruited is he brought in a ton of one and dones, and they moved on, and he had to rebuild literally every year, versus a guy like Mark Pope, who maybe can go out and get some one and dones, but also hit the transfer portal, also hit on some other recruits that come in and develop. So we'll talk with Rick about who his names are on the list, who he thinks Kentucky could or should talk to. But Mark Pope was definitely towards the top of my list. But it'll be interesting to see for sure. And like you said, that first trip to Rupp for Calipari, again, assuming this deal goes down, I mean, the reports are 5 years, $8 million a year, but I haven't actually seen it officially announced yet. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting next 1 or 2 years with just seeing, Calipari and how he attacks Arkansas, but then, like you said, kind of revisiting this whole movement and quite frankly, the domino effect that it could set off across all of college basketball yet again. And I always find it funny, the tweet that was sent out the other day about how all of this really started back in 2010 when Nebraska went to the Big Ten, and now all the conference realignment and SMU firing their coach because even though they had a successful season, just because they were moving to the ACC and wanting a higher profile, and it just, the domino effect in college basketball is real, Nick. And this has the potential to be yet another really big chain of dominoes.
BYU 18th in the country in Ken Palm in their first year in the Big 12, a big year for that program. So yeah, I do think Mark Pope would be a good fit. But Craig, do you know who would be a great fit right now for Off the Bench? Presented by United Dairy Farmers, Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie,
the GOAT.
How we doing, my man?
Good to hear I'm not on any Kentucky watch lists. I don't think I could handle that type of responsibility.
That'd be some real pressure, right?
Seriously.
Man,
you thought Off the Bench was high pressure with this chat. You haven't seen anything yet. How are we doing, Charlie? Happy Tuesday. Where did you take in the Eclipse? Were you at Great American for that?
Yep, they just kept going with batting practice. So yeah, that was actually pretty cool.
Some of the pictures were incredible. I know from up here, pictures didn't do it justice. So for the pictures to be that cool, I bet it had to just be an incredible experience down at Great American Ballpark.
The coolest part to me was to see the players, experience it. That was really cool because for them to, take a break from what they're doing and wait a second. It was like everyone realized the significance and the specialness of what was going on. And then they all took a moment, and the whole Brewers team was in the visiting dugout. And this too, the entire Reds organization was on the field, and that was pretty cool. People you don't see from the front office or the business side, everyone came out on the field together as an organization to take it in. So it's cool to see everyone come together like that.
That is cool. You mentioned obviously the Eclipse happened during batting practice. Another significant event yesterday during batting practice is Jonathan India takes a foul ball off the bat of Nick Martini to the leg, later scratched from the lineup, although it is being reported that he was scratched due to his hand, not the leg. What can you tell us about the latest on Jonathan India and his now potentially 2 injuries?
So it was a combination of things. It was the hand and the leg that led to him not being in the lineup. He really tried to test it out. He ran, he swung the bat pregame. Ultimately couldn't go. And for Jonathan India, no one's tougher to take out of the lineup than Jonathan India. It was a kind of a scary scene. I didn't see it, but I heard it. I was right there, and I just wasn't looking at that part of the field when it happened. And it was very good to see Jonathan India out on the field later that day. And again, the sign that David Bell was expecting him to be in the lineup today, definitely encouraging for India.
So, Charlie, last night, one of the more wild games at Great American Ballpark. Where does that rank in terms of just crazy games that you've covered for the Reds?
Very zany, for sure. No, very memorable in terms of, you go to the ballpark to see stuff like that. Of course, there's Elly, but then the highs and the lows and the swings. And I was all ready for the story of the day to be this is the best Graham Ashcraft has ever pitched, maybe. And that was the case through 4 innings. And then, of course, it fell off after the 5th. But on the whole, just a really memorable performance for Elly De La Cruz and for the Reds.
Yeah, you mentioned Elly. Obviously, last night gets off the snide with his first home run, 450-foot blast to dead center field off the batter's eye. And then obviously followed it up with an inside the park home run later on in the game, now hitting 297 on the year with a 961 OPS. He's 4th in the league with 11 runs scored and already toting a half WAR, 10 games into the season or whatever it is now. What are you seeing out of Elly early this year, or specifically offensively, that you think has led to this performance that we've seen so far out of him?
So, if we had this conversation yesterday, and this will sound like some Monday morning, I wasn't concerned. I know there was a lot of spotlight, the didn't take the bat off his shoulders against the Mets with that big strikeout. That was probably the one moment you'd like to see Elly do something different there. But I thought as a whole, his swing decisions, the quality of his at-bats, the mentality and approach he had at the plate were the intended results of the adjustments he made. And I just felt in a solid place about his swing. And then even before the homers, this is the thing, but this is true. Elly hit an opposite field single. And I said, all right, there it is. That's what he was looking for. That's what he was waiting for. That felt like the type of moment where it's like when you make a mid-range jumper in basketball and it's like, all right, the shot's working. Let's start moving back. And that's exactly what happened for Elly De La Cruz. There were really good signs, even though the results and the power wasn't there. The quality of at-bats I did really think was better. And then, of course, Elly De La Cruz does the Elly De La Cruz things in the end.
So, Charlie, Red's going to go with a 6-man rotation with Nick Lodolo coming back. I guess my question is, how long do you think this will last? I guess also, do you think this is just out of necessity, or do you think the Reds look at a team like the Brewers that they're playing right now and the success that they've had with the 6-man rotation and thinking maybe it's worth a shot for them?
So it's only set through Saturday, and it's a 6-man rotation, but really Lodolo doesn't count on one of those spots right now. So really, roster machination-wise, it really is just a 5-man rotation. And then Lodolo will slot in on Saturday. That was the way the schedule looked best. I get the sense there's no final decision made on whose spot Lodolo will be taking in the long run. They could stick with the 6-man rotation for a turn or two. They probably won't stick with the 6-man rotation for a long time. A very underrated piece of this, too, is the roster crunch as a whole. Very few Reds relievers with options. Sam Maul, very, very close to returning. Ian Jabot, not too far as well, maybe the next 10, 15 days. So, where do these roster spots come from is a very interesting and important question, as the Reds will potentially get three guys who are going to be on the roster back in the next week or two.
Yeah, and obviously with the TJ Antone news, Carson Spires was called up yesterday. Expectation obviously is that'll be a quick 4 or 5 day trip for him, and then he'll be right back down. But let's talk about TJ real quick. I think one of the sadder stories, quite frankly, in the Reds history that I can remember in terms of injuries and just what could have been. What's the feeling you're getting from the front office? I think the general consensus is that this is probably it for TJ. But what are you hearing at this point?
Talking to people yesterday, the sense was any message here is going to come from TJ. No one's going to, tell TJ what the next stage of his career is going to be. No one was rooting for anyone harder than the Reds, and everyone was rooting for TJ to come back from this. And I'll always stick with this too. TJ stopped throwing hard. He completely adjusted who he was, became a completely different style, started trying to beat you with the sinker, throwing 92 instead of 100. That's who he was. And I'll always think that he beat Bryce Harper with that 92 miles per hour sinker. So all of it worked. And, he had that moment, of course you would have loved to do that for a while, but he still did have that comeback and make it work.
And obviously Antone with his arm injuries, this isn't new to him, unfortunately. But there has been seemingly an increase across the league in elbow injuries, specifically Tommy John and otherwise. Some people will try to blame that on the pitch clock. Others will blame it on just a complete shift in the way pitchers approach pitching in a game, with specifically around velocity and spin rate. The Reds have been known as one of the better teams as it pertains to pitcher development specifically, and their pitching staff has been recognized time and time again as being top notch. What, if anything, do you expect to change in the way pitchers approach baseball as a whole based on this recent trend, if at all?
So I talked to Derek Johnson and then Emilio Pagan too for a while about this yesterday. The number one thing is the hyper-specific plan for each player, individualized plan for each player with their arm care routines. And the thing the Reds prioritize, and the thing, Emilio Pagan I thought was interesting because he's played for so many teams. He said, you've got to prioritize Derek Johnson said, what works for one guy won't work for anyone else really. And it's about coming up and developing and finalizing that plan with, again, like Emilio Pagances, he does a lot of curls and he does a lot of stuff with his, I'm forgetting the muscles in the arm, but he says he focuses a lot on the big muscles of the arm because he's a believer that the big muscles are there to look out for the small muscles. And that's what works for him. And Derek Johnson was talking about just how much time and effort they go into specializing these plans. However, he said if he had the answer, he'd be a zillionaire. And there's just no way to completely eliminate these types of injuries from the game. And it's terrible. And it's something that's got to change. But no one really around baseball or the Reds has that big answer right now.
All right, Charlie. So Christian Encarnacion-Strand obviously off to a tough start to the year. I think he's got a 133 on base percentage. David Bell continues to run him out third in the lineup. Do you think that David's just going to continue to do that? Just wants to continue to show confidence of the young player? Do you think they might try to move that around at some point? Where do you see that situation?
I think today's the day to change it more than yesterday was, because if you're going to change, like the Reds have levers to pull against right-handed pitching in a way they don't have levers to pull against left-handed pitching. You know, Santiago Espinal wasn't going to hit third for the Reds yesterday. You know what I mean? Like they want Elly to hit six, stuff like that. Against right-handed pitching, they have some levers. You know, let's move Jake Fraley up to second maybe, or I guess Benson's swinging the bat better now. But are there ways to move Fraley up? Can you move Nick Martini up? Of course, Spencer Steer, an obvious guy who could slot in a third in the lineup. So that's like today I'm looking out for that. I asked David about CES yesterday. David said like he feels very close and it hasn't even felt like a slump, which, you know, that was David Bell's approach or David Bell's view of it. And, you know, you look at the metrics, he's chasing almost as much as anyone in baseball, and he's slumping for the first time, really for the second time in his entire life, which of course is that's not who Strand is. And he'll get every chance to bounce back. His playing time is not going anywhere. But today is a day I'm curious to see if there's a lineup change.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. CES seems to be in a position this year that really wasn't expected due to injuries and otherwise, that there really doesn't seem to be a clear answer to give him a real spell, other than obviously giving Candelario a spot start here at first, or Nick Martini maybe. But, you know, from my perspective as an outsider, it feels like he has to be the everyday guy. He's got to play 150 plus games this year. Otherwise this team can't be successful. But let's shift and let's talk positivity here, Charlie. Everybody in the chat knows Nick and I are all in on the hype. We're really bought in on this team and what they can be. Everybody knows that. Will Benson had gone through a little bit of a slump, obviously. And then yesterday, lefty-lefty matchup really seemed to break out of it after a day off yesterday with the 2 extra base hits. What's your take on that whole situation? Was it Will just needed a day off? Was it just Aaron Ashby's not that great of a pitcher? Maybe a combination of both. What did you see or hear out of Will Benson yesterday?
Yeah, so Will Benson's an everyday guy on this team. He got a day off on Sunday. There wasn't a specific reason, but I'm sure, you know, how he was hitting at the plate. Also, like, they really wanted to get Bubba Thompson a start, like, because of everything he'd done, you know, reward him with that. So someone needed to come out of the lineup. That ended up being Will Benson. I'm going to take a moment to shout out Will Benson's defense. The underrated story of the year is Will Benson is a good defensive center fielder. And that, you know, came out of nowhere. He didn't play center field last year. He was, in his words, average to below average in the corners last year. He said he felt sometimes he was flat-footed. He went through the exact same process in the field that he went through at the plate last year. Completely changed his preparation, his mental side, kind of all the work he does to know where to be or to know what's coming. And it's just worked really, really well. And his defense has been a really big bright spot that, you know, because he can play center, you can get Nick Martini in the lineup. And that's just a big development for the Reds.
All right, Charlie, I got to ask you about a guy that's taken off a little bit this year and kind of won over a little bit of the fan base, and that's, of course, Stuart Fairchild. He's a guy that I don't really ever see any interviews on. So any just insight into Stuart Fairchild, kind of how he's really carved a pretty significant role with this team?
I have a story written on Stu. I just haven't had the right chance to, you know, the right timing yet to publish it. But Stuart went into the lab this offseason more than, like, Elly De La Cruz went into the lab, number one. Next on that list was Stuart Fairchild. Stuart got rid of the leg kick. Stuart worked with a new hitting coach. And really, most importantly, he combined his work with a hitting coach with his work with a private strength and performance coach in Washington. And the end result there was like, and this will sound like like not Stuart Fairchild, but Stuart Fairchild last year was a high fly ball hitter who kind of in a lot of ways was power or bust, which again, that's not who Stuart Fairchild should be as a player. Now what he's doing is he's hitting low line drives, and it sounds simple, but he said he wasn't able to do that last year. So he's just in a better place as a hitter. He's always been a kind of elite runner, kind of sneaky elite runner. He's always been a standout defender. I think he was their 26th man before all the injuries and suspensions and stuff happened. They really like Stuart Fairchild as who he is. And now he's in a bigger role than they expected. And again, they're more than happy to give him some at-bats.
All right, Charlie, we've only got a couple minutes left with you. So let's talk about what everybody loves talking about in April, the Cincinnati Bengals. So the draft now is less than 3 weeks away. The Bengals obviously have made a number of moves to address some depth concerns and some holes in the roster. I think a lot of people would say that interior defensive linemen and cornerback remain needs on this team. What are you hearing going into the draft as it pertains to specifically addressing those holes? Obviously, Tavondre Sweat, a guy who many thought might be on the Bengals board, goes out and gets a DUI this weekend. How does that affect his draft stock? We're 3 weeks away. What are your expectations for April 27th?
Couple things. First, the way, I think their biggest needs are right tackle. The way I've covered the team for 5 years, I've never seen the Bengals' biggest need, I guess, except for quarterback with Joe Burrow, intersect so much with the draft board. And like for the last 2 years, they got Dax Hill. No one expected him to be around. He slid. They didn't expect that. They got him. Same thing with Miles Murphy. This year, it looks like that player is going to be an offensive tackle. And that is a huge development. I am mock drafting Amarius Mims to the Bengals right now. I'm kind of planting my flag in banking on the Bengals' ability to develop and taking that swing on the highest upside guy because he can learn behind Trent Brown. I agree with your needs you said. I do think nose tackles play fewer snaps than you think because of that, because of the way the Bengals the way they need more receiver snaps, because they need another long-term big linchpin developmental piece. If T. Higgins is gone this year, I really would include receiver in that second tier of needs. And right now I'm diving into, the second round receivers and the third round receivers. That is something that could really go a long way for the Bengals. If they hit on that pick, it would allow them to stick with their identity, with a lot more 11 if this guy can play right away and then help you fill Higgins' role in the long term. Then maybe if I'm mock drafting here, I don't have the day 3 in the third round nose tackle list in front of me right now, but you could really fill that smaller role through a smaller pick.
Yeah, you mentioned wide receiver. The Bengals recently visited with Jalen McMillan out of Washington. Seems like a guy who potentially could fill that role. I'm going to ask you to project a little bit. When we talk after the draft is the 25th through the 27th. So when we talk on the 28th or 29th, will T. Higgins be a Cincinnati Bengal still?
I think if they trade him now, they've done something wrong because you open up $20 million in cap space and then there's nowhere to really use that now. Brian Burns got traded on the first day of free agency. I know L'Jarius Sneed took a little more time, but to me, you do it the Brian Burns way. And then when you look at this as well, for leverage, obviously if you're trading T. Higgins, you want as much leverage as you can. You want to make that trade when the teams who would want T. Higgins still want T. Higgins. And now the Texans filled that need. The Panthers filled that need. The Texans got Diggs. The Panthers got Johnson. The Titans got Calvin Ridley. Like those were 1, 2, and 3 on your T. Higgins power rankings trade teams. And now those teams wouldn't be interested anymore. So you have less leverage. And so, again, if they would still trade him now, it feels like they would really be missing out.
Interesting take. There's a lot of people out there who think that they can package them with their first rounder to try and move up and maybe even take his replacement earlier in the first round. But sounds like maybe the partner isn't there for that. So that's great insight. Charlie, as always, we appreciate you taking the time for us. You've been amazing for Off the Bench and for Chatterbox as a whole. So really appreciate you taking the time yet again on short notice. And I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Charlie.
Appreciate you, Charlie. Charlie Goldsmith, the hardest working man in Cincinnati sports. Man, that guy's the absolute best. Always appreciate him coming on and being so generous with his time. I can't believe we've already filled 50 minutes and we talked about the Reds for like 6 seconds. That's pretty incredible. I didn't think we'd get 30 minutes of college basketball talk, but we did. We found a way. Let's run through our sponsors real quick. Rick Broering coming up at 11. We'll just keep this this show rolling right along. Of course, Off the Bench presented as always by UDF. Get your coffee, get your milkshake, get your ice cream from UDF. Also, Encore Technologies. Encore offers a suite of IT solutions from mobile computing to the desktop to data center, supporting centralized and work-from-home computing models. Encore solutions are aimed at maximizing our customers' IT investments and improving overall efficiency and
productivity.
All right. And then, of course, Pawnee Premium Alkaline Water. They offer superior hydration, alkaline benefits. There's directional studies that show alkaline water has many health benefits. And they also use a limestone filtration, a natural limestone filtration process, unlike many competitors that use artificial means. So be sure to check out Pawnee Water. I've seen it pop up more and more every time I'm down in Cincinnati. It feels like every gas station, every convenience store is starting to have Pawnee Water. And that, of course, is great to see. And then, of course, the Game Time app. You can get $20 off your first purchase with the code OTB. So download the Game Time app. Reds in town tonight, Tuesday night, Wednesday, and then Thursday afternoon as well. So download the Game Time app. Use that promo code OTB. Get $20 off your first purchase. The Game Time app is just a really, really incredible app. Really easy to see the seat views. Really easy to get the all-in pricing. So be sure to use the Game Time app. Use that promo code OTB. Get $20 off your first purchase. And yeah, that's our proud sponsors here at Off the Bench. All right, Rick Broering coming in about 9 minutes. Let's cram in some Red stock. Craig, let's cram it in.
Cram it in.
Big win last night for the Reds. Obviously, you know, a team that they went 3-10 against last year, getting that first one, getting it with the way they did it with Elly De La Cruz having, you know, just his fingerprints literally all throughout that game. That's kind of Elly at his best. You see the 450-foot home run. You also see his speed just being an absolute game changer. Just a huge win for the Reds, Greg.
It is, and you know, I'll self-tattle a little bit here. I mean, the Reds were up 8-0, and the Brewers started to chip back, and you know, you kind of get that doubt in the back of your head, right? I mean, we all remember that game against Pittsburgh last year that the Reds were up, I think 9-0 and gave up the lead. And like you said last night on Chatterbox Reds, I mean, the Brewers have just had the Reds numbers. It seems like every time they play, the Brewers find some way to turn that dagger a little bit more into the heart of Reds fans. And I think it was really big for the Reds to be able to hold on in that scenario, both as not only just a little like confidence boost, but just, you know, to get that monkey off the back, specifically with the Milwaukee Brewers. I think that the Brewers are a young team similar to the Reds, where they've got some good pieces and guys like Broering that, you know, can be contributors for a long time, and they're in a little bit of a rebuild here. And so, you know, it was a good win. I don't think that the Brewers are going to be like earth-shatteringly good this year, but, you know, I just think that sometimes for the psyche, it takes a little bit of a game like last night to be able to just tell yourself, yes, we can do this. And, you know, the Reds were able to do that last night.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I don't think that the Brewers are necessarily a juggernaut, maybe like they've kind of been in years past. But nonetheless, you know, the Reds came in a couple games behind them. And the last thing you want to do is get 4 or 5 games behind them in April. Because I don't know if this Reds team, I'm high on this Reds team. I think this Reds team can absolutely win the NL Central this year. But I don't feel super confident that this team could chase a team if they're down 7, 8, 9 games midway through the season. I'm just not sure that they have the offensive, you know, prowess to really do something like that. I mean, anything's possible. Baseball's a crazy game. But I think it's just huge to get a win in game 1 against the Brewers. And, you know, look, now you win 1 game the next 3 days. You at least split. You win 2 of 3. You win 3 of 4 against the Brewers. If you do that, I think you're really, really feeling good about where you're at.
I mean, without a doubt, the Reds currently sit in 3rd in the NL Central. you told people all off season to watch out for the Pirates, and here we are. They're sitting at 9-2 after 11 games. So I agree with you. Ultimately, I don't think this team is built for another 12 game win streak. So they can't afford to get down 7-8 games like they did last year. And quite frankly, this division is extremely competitive. And when every team right now is sitting, the Cardinals are in the basement at 5-6. Like this league, this division is going to be competitive all year long. When you look at the West and in the East, the Braves and the Dodgers are expected to run away with both of those divisions. And so, if the Reds can continue to be competitive in the NL Central, not only are they going to have a chance to compete for the NL Central title, but I think it'll put them in a good position to be wild card team as well. Because I do think that the Dodgers and the Braves are probably going to beat up a little bit on their divisions respectively. So I think if they can continue to perform like they are, avoid multiple game losing streaks, the Reds haven't lost back-to-back games yet. I think they're going to be in a good position, come the second half of the season.
Saw some good comments in the chat about, the Reds bullpen tonight. Maybe Diaz wouldn't be available through 25 pitches on Saturday, through 19 pitches last night. The Reds are sitting a little better, though. Lucas Sims, he threw 17 last night. That's the only pitches he's thrown in the last 5 days. Elly De La Cruz threw 14 pitches, but he didn't pitch on Saturday or Sunday. So I think you have both of those guys if you just move them each back in inning. Suter and Farmer and Pagan are pretty fresh. Justin Wilson's pretty fresh because he got rocked last night. He only ended up throwing 8 pitches. So I don't think the Reds bullpen's necessarily in a bad spot. And then of course they also have Carson Spires, who could give them 3-4 innings at least if they need to. So I don't think that they're in a bad spot. Craig, what's kind of your overall thoughts on this bullpen? So many moving pieces as Charlie was talking about with Mole and Jabot going to be added on as well. I feel good about this bullpen. I don't feel great about this bullpen. Is that kind of where you're at?
Yeah, well, we talked about it before the season. I feel like this bullpen is set up better for situational baseball, which is what David Bell likes to manage for. And so, tonight's a good example. You may not have Alexis Diaz available to close, but I think that your bullpen is built up in order to be able to address situationally, right? So I actually think that whoever closes the game tonight, assuming the Reds are in a position to get a close, is just going to be dependent on where we are in the lineup, right? I think you've got guys like Brett Suter who very clearly can come in and get lefties out. You've got Lucas Sims who can very clearly come in and get strikeouts. He did that last night. He came in and got 3 strikeouts, struck out the side. Lucas Sims certainly has closer stuff when he's on. So I don't have any real doubts in terms of who's going to be able to fill in that role tonight when Alexis Diaz needs a night off. Ultimately, I think it just is situational, and that's realistically what David Bell has been all about since day one. I mean, everything he does is about situations and who's going to put them in the best position to succeed at that moment. So yeah, I feel good about it overall. Like you mentioned, you've got Sam Mull and Ian Jabot probably scheduled to come back in the next week or so. Ian Jabot's currently in a AAA doing a rehab stint. So when he's ready to come back, obviously, like you mentioned, Carson Spires just heads back to AAA. The question will be when Sam Mull comes back, what do you do? That'll put you in a position where you potentially have 3 left-handed relievers in your bullpen. And I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how they address that. With Justin Wilson, obviously got beat up last night. Hasn't really blown me away with what he's been able to do versus Suter, who's shown an ability to go multiple innings, get guys out, pitch to contact. So I don't know. I feel good about it. I don't feel confident about what the future looks like, if that makes sense. I don't necessarily worry. I just don't know what it's going to look like.
One thing to keep in mind, Sam Mull does have options. And his velocity has been down a couple miles an hour down at AAA. So that is an option. I know he was incredible last year, but that's an option just to kind of keep more guys in your organization. One more quick point before we get to Rick Broering. And I thought about this last night as the Reds kind of were blowing that big lead. Last year, remember that game against the Pirates? Fernando Cruz came in trying to put the fire out, gave up 3 runs. Lucas Sims came in, ended up getting the actual blown save, let the inherited runner scored. So it's cool to see those guys put a stop to the Brewers making this big comeback. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting way to dissect that game. But let's bring on Rick Broering. Rick kind of has to join us the day after the college basketball season ends, but I know for you, Rick, that there's no sleeping ever in the college basketball calendar.
It is certainly not the offseason right now in the college basketball world if you're doing what I do, Nick. As you know, the transfer portal is alive and well.
So, Rick, let's start off with the national championship game. Obviously, you cover Xavier, so you're very familiar with UConn. What an incredible 2-year run from Dan Hurley, from where that program was when he took it over. Just talk a little bit about what UConn has been able to accomplish.
Well, it's also so impressive that he called his shot. We've now seen 700 other Division I head coaches try to do a cheap imitation of his "we're coming, you better get us now because we're coming," like he did 2 years ago. But when he originally did that, it was one of those moments where everyone was like, this dude's going to look like an idiot, or it's going to turn into what it turned into. And he delivered on those lines in the biggest way possible. And Nick, it's funny because, I've been looking through the way they've put together this UConn roster. I know I've been asked a few times about it, like, what is instructive here about what Dan Hurley and this UConn coaching staff has done in the new transfer portal and NIL era when it comes to putting together this roster. And I hate to tell fans this, but the conclusion I keep coming to is they're a blue blood that did blue blood things. They went and got top transfers out of the portal. They also recruited 3 extremely talented high school recruits that they developed themselves. 2 are sophomores this year, and 1 was a freshman in Stephen Castle. And then they blended that with a couple of older transfer guys who are really good. And that's the type of thing you can do when you're a blue blood program. Now, in addition to that, they were able to get all these really talented guys to play unselfishly, to play with a high IQ, to buy into a really complex system. So there are impressive things that the coaching staff did, but a lot of it comes down to the fact that they have really, really good players, and I'm not sure every other program can replicate that.
Nick brought it up earlier in the show, and I tend to agree, and I think social media would tend to agree as well. But obviously, the roster construction on this UConn team has been extremely impressive and obviously worked out for the better for them. But I'm not sure that Danny Hurley gets the credit that he deserves as an X's and O's coach as well. The sets that they run, the scouting reports, even, I mean, the attack that they had against Purdue last night, obviously allowing Zach Edey to do what he does, but shutting down pretty much everybody else. I think their next highest scorer had 12 and nobody else had more than 5. From your perspective as a Xavier loyalist, what is it about Danny Hurley's system that works so well for that roster that he's compiled?
Craig, who is your team? Who do you follow?
Well, I grew up a Kentucky fan.
Okay, I knew it wasn't a Big East school because you said that Danny Hurley doesn't get credit for being X and O guy, and if you follow the Big East at all, it's all Big East fans talk about. Like, you would think Dan Hurley invented the sport of basketball the way people talk about his X's and O's. And I'm not saying he's not incredible because he is, but like last night I read an article in The Athletic where they were like acting like he invented how to call plays. It's like he took a football system where he's like, you have the number of players on the court and what set they're in, and then you add in a couple of other terms onto it, and then it's like it builds on each other. Like, this was some insane concept. It's like, guys, I hate to tell you this, I've been calling NKU games for the last 4 years going to practice. That's the same thing NKU's been doing. Like, that's pretty standard stuff. Not every coach does it that way. They all have different looks, but like it's not anything that's too crazy in terms of like their actual X's and O's. But to your point, Craig, what he is so good at is, one, he's willing to run a ton of set plays. And to do that and still play with flow and pace and have your guys not become robots, I think is really difficult to do. I think you have to have really high IQ players and really unselfish players to run sets the way they do. And then I said this on my Musketeer Report message board last night. It's the hard part isn't getting the guys into the right spots and getting them to remember what play you're running. I mean, these guys practice so damn much throughout the course of the season. They all know the plays. The hard part is to get them to run all those plays, get the other team worried about them, get them confused, thinking this is coming. Oh, there's an elevator screen on this backside and all this stuff. And meanwhile, your players are good enough and smart enough to read and react out of that. If they see you doing something to try to take away the set that's coming, they can then make a play and exploit whatever weakness you're giving them. That's where UConn is really special, I think.
All right, Rick, I promise we'll have you on again, and not the first two topics won't be UConn, UK, and Arkansas. But when that news came across that Calipari was going to Arkansas, what was your reaction? Because I saw that and I was like, this has to be fake. This has to be a Twitter troll. I was like double checking the accounts. Like, that guy looks pretty legit. What was your thoughts on this?
So I promise you, I'm not trying to do some like name drop, I've got inside sources here thing. But one of my really good friends used to work in the UK athletic department, and he is still really close with two people who are inside. Now, they're not like on the basketball staff, but they are aware of big picture things that are going on. And he started texting me Sunday evening around maybe like 7 p.m. about like, hey, I know you're going to see some of this Cal to Arkansas stuff. I think it's legit. And I was like, what do you mean it's legit? And he's like, well, his friend who's inside the athletic department was telling him when they had dinner a couple weeks ago that like Cal's wife is super unhappy with the whole situation in Lexington and how uncomfortable it is. And that there has been other schools, not just Arkansas, that have already back-channeled him, and he's shown some interest. And obviously Matt Norlander reported that as long ago as February, when the Ohio State job first opened up, he had reached out and back-channeled to see what was going on with the Ohio State job. So I believe that was true as well. And sure enough, I mean, as the night continued to unfold, Nick, like it came so fast. And because you're a sports guy who's in the Twitterverse who loves to interact in these types of moments. That's an all-time college basketball night on social media. I mean, the fact that it happened so quickly, that it was late Sunday night, and you have like John Rothstein's in bed and people are all fired up because he's not talking about the big news that's going on. I mean, there are so many different things going on when this happened. It was a great college basketball night.
It was a great night. I think one of the things that, and you brought it up, one of the things that's interesting is the general take right now is that one of the reasons that Calipari is leaving is he has felt a lack of support, not only from the fans, but a little bit from the administration as well. Is that shocking to you to hear that a blue blood program like Kentucky and its fans, I guess specifically, aren't supporting a guy who's had 50 NBA players come through the program in 15 years, has won a national championship? Obviously, the last couple of years has not necessarily met expectations, but are the fans jumping a little quick here? What's your general take on the whole situation?
It's funny, Craig. I would say up until this season, I was fully on the sort of wavelength that you just laid out of like, UK fans are crazy. This is insane. It's John Calipari. He's been really good. Look at what he's bringing in. Look at the talent he's still getting you and all of that. This year changed that for me. At a certain point, it's like he had tried to change over the last few years his method of doing things. He had brought in more experienced players. He had gotten transfers. He had tried to go the shooter route, bringing in like 2 or 3 different mid-major shooters to boost his roster a few years ago. He did have the National Player of the Year with a big man in Oscar Tshiebwe. And then this year, he went to a more perimeter-oriented offense where they're shooting a lot of threes and playing smaller lineups at times. He's done the adjustments that the fan base have asked for over the last few years, and none of it worked. They kept flaming out. And then that's not to say they didn't have some good wins and they weren't talented. They weren't ranked highly at times. But at Kentucky, I mean, think back. We're basically talking about right before the beginning of COVID, this downturn where they've really struggled. Since then, every other blue blood program has had a Final Four except for Kentucky. So it's not like we're past the point of like, well, you guys are just being ridiculous. You're over the top. You have too high of expectations. It's like, no, if you're a blue blood program, this is what that looks like. Getting to the Final Four is a fairly regular occurrence. Making Elite Eights should be a thing that happens for you. I mean, look at Duke this year. No one thought they were good. Everyone's thinking, oh, is John Shire really the right guy? Is he going to be the guy to come in after Coach K and keep this thing rolling? Duke made an Elite Eight in a down year this year. And it didn't really seem like a big deal. I mean, like, it's not unreasonable at this point for UK fans to be expecting more. And my point at the end of the day with Cal and that decision, I was shocked that Mitch Barnhart wanted to bring him back, because what was going to change between this year and next year? Great. You have a bunch of talented kids coming in. So what? You've had that every year. He's had great rosters.
One of the knocks against John Calipari, really for his entire tenure, has been that he's very stubborn, right? He does it his way, and that's the way he's going to do it, and that's not going to change. You saw it even this year a little bit, even with the way that his starting lineup was constructed. You have a guy like Reed Shepherd, who's expected to be a lottery draft pick, who's coming off your bench because you refuse to make changes, or you overpromise something to a player in order to get him to come to your program, or whatever it may have been. He refuses to really hit the transfer portal hard. He goes after a lot of the one and dones, as we've talked about. That's not likely to change at Arkansas based on what we've seen out of John Calipari for the last 15 plus years. What's a realistic expectation for the Arkansas program when we revisit this move from him in 1, 3, and 5 years?
That's a really good question, Craig. And the answer to that is we don't know, but I would be optimistic if I was an Arkansas fan, and I'll tell you why. I think Cal's stubbornness, or the big issues he had that made him seem so stubborn late, was more to do with some weird mental spat that he got into with like the fan base and everyone in Lexington. To your point about him being stubborn, it kind of became this thing of like, you guys think I have to do things your way? Well, watch this. Watch how I'm going to do it. And he would literally say those words. He would win a game, like go back and watch the press conference after they won at at Auburn this year. Afterwards, he was like, I mean, honestly, it was like he was on drugs or something. It was insane to listen to. And he was like, see, did you see what I did there? You guys, well, we're all ready for us to lose. And I did this. I figured it out. My team was doing it the right way all along. You guys were the stupid ones. This essentially was kind of his vibe in that press conference. And I think like that's the place he got to, whereas everything was a fight against the UK administration, the UK boosters, the UK fan base. When he first got there, it wasn't that way. He was like the best politician you've ever seen. He was the guy going into the local coffee shop in like Cynthiana, Kentucky, and drinking a cup of coffee with a bunch of 90-year-olds and having a donut and talking about UK basketball and the glory days and like that type of stuff. I think he will get back to being Cal, being the guy that made UK the cool program, the guy that had Drake around, the guy that originally brought UK to the forefront of college basketball for that first decade that he was there. I think you're going to get a more similar version to that version of Cal around at Arkansas now, because I think the toxicity that had occurred and taken place over time at Kentucky with those relationships is gone now. And he's probably relieved to be away from that just as much as the Kentucky people are.
I think it's going to be great for the sport, though. I tell you what, UK, Arkansas, this is what college basketball needs. This is the best form of the sport.
You're not kidding, Nick. I mean, this is so great. It's great theater. It's great storylines now for the offseason to keep us going. And then when the season starts back up next year, I mean, what incredible storylines that we have. Not only does the premier program in college basketball have a new head coach, but also, I mean, John Calipari trying to figure things out in Arkansas is going to be an incredible storyline to follow in the SEC.
And they're going to be compared literally every day. What's Arkansas doing? What's Kentucky doing for years to come? That'll be fun. I want to ask you about UK's next coach and who you think might be some of the names to look for. But before I get to that, Rick, I need you to be honest with me. As a guy who loves the Horizon League, how satisfying was it to see the Oakland Grizzlies be the death blow to John Calipari?
Well, you know, it was funny because I totally had that take wrong. I said, we did a preview podcast with Richard Skinner beforehand, and I said that I thought Jack Golke could really be a problem for UK with the way they defend, that he could go off and have a big night shooting. And I said, even with that though, like, I think UK is going to win by double digits and they'll easily cover the spread. I think there's a great matchup for Kentucky. Like, Oakland's best player, the player of the year in the Horizon League, was a 6'6" non-shooting power forward, and UK has all this size and length and athleticism underneath the basket. It's like at some point they're going to be able to take away Trey Townsend, if nothing else. And they did okay against Trey Townsend. He had a decent game. It wasn't anything spectacular, but Jack Golke coming out with that flamethrower and putting 10 threes on him and them not being able to figure out how to take that away was incredible to watch. But I got it wrong. I'll say that. I did not see Oakland coming in there and pulling that upset at all.
Well, and I think we both can agree that it couldn't have happened. Oh, I think we both can agree that it couldn't happen to a better guy with Greg Campy. I mean, as someone who worked in the Horizon League and obviously yourself knowing the Horizon League so well with your ties to Northern Kentucky, I mean, the man is so well respected across the entire league, and I think across the entire country, not only for his coaching abilities and his loyalty to Oakland, but just who he is as a person as well.
You got to give him a lot of credit. And I think this is kind of cool because in some way it validates the basketball side of things for Greg Campy. Because like you said, all these people talk about how great he is, how special of a coach he is, how he's been there for 40 years. But you kind of get the sense that it's sort of like when everyone talks about how great of a guy someone is, you know, it's like, he's such a great guy. It's like, well, you like that because you beat him all the time, right? Like, I mean, like with Greg Campy, it's like, he's such a great coach. Yeah. Is he? Because he's never won a Horizon League tournament since he's joined. Like, he's had the best team multiple times. They've never won it. And it just, you know, like, I don't know. And this year he finally made it. And not only did he make it, but he capitalized on the opportunity, pulled the big upset over Kentucky, and the whole world got to see what a character Greg Campy is. Just a real quick story I'll tell you. My first year of calling games at NKU, he's out there at midcourt before the tip-off talking to the officials before NKU's game against Oakland, and he says, "Sorry if my breath smells like onions. I just downed a couple of cheese conies before I came out here." I mean, this is before tip-off of the game, and he had just downed 3 cheese conies, according to him, in the locker room. You don't get a lot of guys like Greg Campy. It's great to see someone like him succeed.
He's the best. He's the best. All right, let's go on to the topic that Nick mentioned, the Kentucky men's basketball head coaching search. Assuming that all of this goes down with Calipari as expected later today, Nick and I seem to be on the same page that your first, second, third, fourth, fifth call have to be to Dan Hurley to try and get him to come. Let's make the assumption that Dan doesn't take the job. Who are the other names on your list for this job that you think will be contacted? And then give us a dark horse of someone that maybe people aren't thinking about that you think would be a good fit.
Dan Hurley, I agree with you. It's like the name that make him say no, at least. I mean, I don't think there's any chance you're getting him. He just won another national title. And obviously, if you've listened to his comments last night, and his wife doesn't want to live in Lexington or whatever. So that's great. I believe him on that. I don't think he's just trying to get a bigger paycheck out of Kentucky. I really don't think he will end up there. Billy Donovan is the other name that a lot of people are throwing out there that seems like would be a really good get for Kentucky. The problem with Billy Donovan, and there had been some rumors that he might be interested this time around. Obviously, he had turned them down 2 times before when they hired Billy Clyde Gillespie, and then when they hired Cal, they wanted Donovan both of those times, and he said no. Rumors that he might be interested this time, but I think the problem there is the Bulls are trying to work their way into that play-in game and the playoffs still right now. Kentucky can't wait for a coach. Like, the transfer portal's humming. They can't wait to figure out what's going to happen with the rest of the Bull season and then see if Billy Donovan says yes or not. So I just don't know that the timing is going to work out with Billy Donovan. And so then that gets you into, I think, kind of the Nate Oates portion of the program. Obviously, he came out yesterday and said that he's not going anywhere. So I feel like that's pretty legit too. We can cross him off the list. After that, it starts getting a bit more interesting. I think there are still some names out there that everyone's excited about as UK fans, but I think you also start hearing some more names like a Bruce Pearl and a Sean Miller and like some of the other names where you're going to have UK fans not as excited about or have more questions about, or they're going to be more of a split decision there. Quite honestly, I'm curious to see where this goes over the next 24 hours because it feels like we're still in that stage of everyone's posturing and we don't really know who the real candidates are. I think we'll have a much better feel for that in, like I said, 24 to 48 hours where we kind of get through this portion of everyone's putting out their social media statement saying that they're not going to be taking the job. One real dark horse name here that I'll throw out to you, and I don't think this guy will be a candidate at all, but one that like I keep hearing everyone talk about, Nate Oates, and it's Kentucky fans are really excited about analytics, and Nate Oates is popular for the analytics because he's good at math and he realizes that 3-pointers are worth more than 2, and so he lets his team shoot a lot of them. And I think UK fans really like the idea of that because Cal has been so against analytics and shooting a lot of threes. What about Micah Shrewsbury at Notre Dame? Had good success for a couple years at Penn State. He's a very analytical guy. His team shot a ton of threes. They're like top 7 or 8 in the country in threes attempted his second year at Penn State when they were really good and went to the tournament. And now he's been at Notre Dame for a year. I don't know what like the contract situation or buyout situation is there, but if it's affordable enough, if you're really hard pressed for that analytical guy and a guy that would win the press conference and be really engaging and easy to deal with and kind of be a nice soft landing spot after having the rough ending with Cal, I think that might be an interesting name to look at. Again, I don't think he'll be brought up, but I think it's kind of like the poor man's Nate Oates here, maybe if you feel like you can't get Nate Oates.
All right, Rick, I asked you to come on for a couple minutes, and we've been going for a while, so appreciate your time. I got to ask you about Xavier's offseason. Obviously, they've lost a lot of guys already. Not sure most Xavier fans are necessarily too upset about the turnover because it felt like this team needed it. What's kind of your overall, take on this offseason and how Sean Miller can get Xavier back next season?
Yeah, no concerns about any of the individual guys that have left the program so far. To your point, I don't think any of them were being counted on as big-time contributors next year necessarily. And if they were, then there was some concerns about that probably. So the more interesting thing is that all of them left, and all of the front court players left pretty much right away. So you just have a lot of pieces that you have to fill. That's not to say you can't pretty much get the same or better than you had last year, but you got to do better than last year because last year wasn't nearly good enough. So trying to fill all those pieces and then on top of that, bring in better talent, that's going to be a real challenge for the coaching staff in the transfer portal over the next few days or next few weeks. Obviously, they added Furman transfer Marcus Foster's 6'4", 200 pounds, really long arms, kind of an interesting combination of a guy who can shoot the ball, run off screens and catch and shoot, but then also go inside and rebound. So I think that's one theme that you're going to continue to see as Xavier navigates the transfer portal. Sean Miller and this coaching staff really want to upgrade the toughness and physicality of this team compared to last year's. They just were not physically where he needed them to be.
It's a great point. You're you're obviously extremely tied into Northern Kentucky. Guy like Marcus Warwick, has become the Horizon League's all-time leader in career points scored. He's from Lexington, right in Kentucky's backyard, a guy that Kentucky hasn't, didn't look at. But the way Cal has recruited certainly kind of missed some of those homegrown opportunities. Kentucky is known as a really good high school basketball state. Do you expect that to change with the new head coach?
Obviously, that will completely depend on who that coach is, right? I mean, some coaches feel that it's more of a big deal to recruit the surrounding area around their school. I personally don't buy into that at all. I think that's a good way to get fired, is like getting too caught up in having to land local kids that mean something to the community. It's like they won't care. If you lose with the local kids, they'll hate you and the local kid just as much. It does not matter where they're from, just win the games. And to that point, I don't know that Kentucky is usually flushed with a lot of talent that's right for Kentucky's level. So I don't know if that's going to be a big concern of the next head coach, but I do think it's possible you'll see a guy who makes it more of a point to go after some of the local guys. And I think even like when Cal first started, you saw him bring in a guy like a Dominique Hawkins to the bench. And like he wasn't necessarily a highly thought of prospect, but he saw him play well at the state tournament, brought him into the end of the bench, and then he had a nice role over the course of his career. So even Cal kind of did that a little bit earlier on in his career, and then I think he kind of quit caring about what people thought. I imagine you'll see a little bit more of that with the new head coach, yeah.
All right, Rick, we'll end it with this. Give us your next head coach at Kentucky.
Man, I mean, do we know for sure? I saw some rumors on social media. Has Scott Drew turned it down for sure or not?
I haven't seen that.
Okay, I have not seen that Scott Drew has turned it down yet. I don't know if we're going to hear that today or not, but if Scott Drew has not turned it down yet, that is the guy that I think, and that's the guy I've always thought was the most likely big name candidate out there. There's always been this rumor ever since the COVID bubble that happened that Mitch Barnhart and Scott Drew really hit it off there and have become like good friends. And also there might be like some type of religious connection between them or something out. And they're both big Christian guys, I guess. So I don't know. Maybe that'll be Scott Drew. I'll go with Scott Drew as my pick.
All right, Rick, really appreciate your time. Always the best college basketball insight. Be sure to check out Rick at musketeerreport.com. Do incredible work over there. Thanks a lot, Rick.
Nick, thank you. Enjoying your Reds coverage as always, man. Keep it up.
All right. Talk to you later, Rick. All right, Rick Broering, the best in the business. Man, that was a lot. We go through a lot of college basketball talk there. Craig, sorry, I threw you under the bus on Warwick there at the end. Sorry about that. I guess I should have phrased in our chat the question a little bit better than so vague. So that was on me.
For those people that don't see it, there's a private chat feature in StreamYard that allows Nick and I to like communicate like, hey, I've got a follow-up, or hey, ask this. Nick just sends me a message and says, Craig, ask about NKU and Warwick. And I'm like struggling. I'm like, is there some sort of news about Marcus Warwick that I don't know? Like what? I'm over here Googling, NKU Marcus Warwick. Like, did something happen? What am I missing? He was a senior this year? Like, does he have what? I'm like, all right, I don't know what I'm supposed to ask here. So let's just BS my way through this, Nick. I don't know what the hell you're looking for here, but shout out to Kirby.
Did you figure it out?
No, I still have no idea what you wanted me to ask.
So Marcus Warwick is transferring, and UC's one of the 5 programs he listed on his potential transfers.
I tried to figure it out really quick. I looked at, but he played 4 years at Northern Kentucky, so I was like, well, does he even have another year to transfer? Like, nothing came up when I Googled it. Like, the top stories were that he's become the NKU's all-time leading scorer. I'm like, what does Nick want from me out of this? Like, I'm so confused. But hey, I threw his name out there. I said, hey, let's figure this out. But for anybody who was like, what is that last question? You can thank Nick for that one.
It was all my fault on me. I should have just said, Craig, I'll ask the last question to wrap this up. But I wanted to try to have it more smooth, and instead now we're talking about it 10 minutes later. So it was definitely not smooth. So apologies.
No, good stuff with Rick. And look, the domino effect we talked about earlier with the coaching, obviously, but the domino effect with recruiting as well is already underway. Rick mentioned the fact that Kentucky's going to have to move quickly. They're probably already talking to potential replacements, assuming that this is actually going through. But freshman Aaron Bradshaw has already entered the transfer portal. Top 25 recruit Carter Knox has decommitted. Now his father has said that he'll still consider Kentucky, but he's also going to consider Arkansas and anything else. So, I mean, as with any coaching change, this has dominoes across the board with not only the coaching, but also with the players. I saw yesterday, Nick, I don't know if you saw this, that the NCAA is actually considering a change to their transfer legislation to allow student athletes to transfer at any time as long as they're in good academic standing without having to sit out a year. So for those people that already hate the transfer portal and what it has done for recruiting and changing the landscape of college basketball, get ready, because I think it's about to get even more extreme with student athletes being able to transfer multiple times without having to sit out.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that's going to continue to be an issue in college basketball. And it's kind of cat's out of the bag now. There's definitely no going back. So it kind of is what it is. I did just see this. I didn't mean to do that. I don't know how to not make the ticker. So it's on the ticker. But Kentucky's going to contact Hurley, Billy Donovan, and Scott Drew. That's the official list from KY Sports Radio. So that's the I guess top 3 targets, and those guys all make sense. Scott Drew's a guy that to me has done such an incredible job at Baylor. Baylor was not thought of as a big basketball program when he took it over. Won a national title there. He seems like maybe the easiest fit there. But he's been at Baylor so long. It's hard to know the motivation of these guys. Like, is Scott Drew? Is he like a Mark Few where he's just, hey, I'm where I am. The grass is not greener on the other side, or would he make that kind of jump? I don't know the answer to that, but he does seem like he would be the smoothest fit for Kentucky.
Yeah, well, I think it depends on what you're considering a fit for Kentucky, right? So Scott Drew's been the head coach at Baylor now for 21 years. I mean, he's got there in 2003 after a short stint at
No
Valpo.
way.
I mean, like the opportunity that's going to have to present itself to take Scott Drew away from Baylor is going to have to be something of the style of Kentucky, right? I mean, ultimately, if Scott Drew is going to leave Baylor ever, it feels like now's the time. But it's, it's one of those things where, to your point, like Baylor wasn't a good program before he got there, but they really weren't that great for his first 10-ish years. I mean, maybe I'm misremembering if I'm going back and looking at their finishes and their standings. So he got to Baylor 2003, 2004 season. His first 5 years, his first 4 years, I should say, he won a combined 36 games. So not great. But then, yeah, I mean, you get to 2009, I guess, so his first 7 years, and then he makes the Elite Eight. So, and then he missed the postseason the next year, and then ever since then he's been pretty competitive. They won the NIT in 2012, 2013, and then Sweet 16, tourney appearance, Sweet 16, NIT, won a game in the tournament, and then obviously in 2020 when they really took that next step after the COVID year, they won the championship. They went 28-2, 13-1 in conference, and won the whole thing. But since then has only won one game in the NCAA tournament the last 3 years. I know I'm sounding like a bitter Kentucky fan, but like I think ultimately when you look at a guy who's been at a program for 21 years, are you getting yourself into another situation like you've had with Cal, like you've had with Tubby, like you've had with Rick Pitino, where like they win maybe once during a long tenure and they just don't do anything else? I mean, I think ultimately Kentucky fans and Kentucky administration is looking for an opportunity to take that program to where UConn is today, right? Where they're making multiple Final Fours and they're winning multiple championships. And the question becomes, like, can Scott Drew get you there with the resources that Kentucky is going to give their head coach? I don't know that answer. And quite frankly, nobody knows that answer, and nobody will know that answer until that new head coach takes over. But when you look at John Calipari, who was at Kentucky since 2009, he took over from Billy Gillispie, who quite frankly was like a dumpster fire of a head coach at Kentucky. And I think the fans probably gave John Calipari a little bit of a longer leash, and the administration gave John Calipari a little bit of a longer leash because they were coming off of Billy Gillispie. They had Tubby Smith, who won an NCAA championship in his first 2 years, I believe. He won his second year, if I'm remembering correctly. And then after a number of years, he just wasn't getting it done anymore, and they moved on to a guy in Billy Gillispie who just did not get the job done. And so I think they're in a position now where it's okay, well, we're willing to keep John Calipari because he's done a good enough job. He wasn't Billy Gillispie. But what are the expectations for that next head coach is going to be the question. And, do they believe that Scott Drew is the guy that can do that for them? Obviously we both believe that Dan Hurley is going to be that guy, but he probably won't take the job. I know you're high on Billy Donovan. I'm not as high on that as a fit today. But the next, like Rick said, the next 48 hours is going to be a huge pivotal moment for Kentucky basketball as we look back at this whole situation in a couple of years. I mean, who they're able to recruit to be their next head coach is going to tell a lot about not only this administration and their buy-in to men's basketball and what it can bring to the state and to this university, but it's going to tell a lot about where the program is as a whole. I think in the national eyes, I think there's a lot of people, especially locally here in the tri-state area, that think that Kentucky is a top 2 or 3 program in the country. We'll see if the head coach search reflects that.
The biggest problem with the Kentucky coaching search is when you compare most coaches to what John Calipari did, it's like, oh, at best, it's not much different, right? That's the problem. There's just, it's hard to really beat a guy that's had as much success as he's had. Scott Drew, though, I mean, his last several years, he's been on a really incredible run. 2022, they were number 3 in KenPom. They were going to be a number 1 seed. 2021, when they won the national championship, they were number 2 in KenPom. They were number 1 seed. 2022, number 4, number 1 seed. And then the last 2 years, 15th and 16th in KenPom, 3 seeds each of the last 2 years. But 3 straight second-round exits, like you said. So you're not going to find that a lot. So it'll be interesting to see if Kentucky, if they have their choice, if they just go for, a guy that has an incredible track record, or if they do go for a guy with maybe more upside, like a Mark Pope or like Rick said, the coach at Notre Dame, a guy that maybe doesn't have that pedigree, but you could kind of mold into whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, and Rick said this, so I don't want to I don't want to make any negative comments towards his comment. He said that this wasn't going to be a candidate, but like, if you're moving to Micah Shrewsbury as your next head coach as Kentucky basketball, like things are dire. No offense to Micah Shrewsbury. I know he's a very good coach, but like, especially after this year that he had at Notre Dame and the way things went down there, not only obviously the lack of success, but just the very public battles that he had with his players and a number of other things that went down publicly there. Like, there's zero chance that he can even have a conversation with Kentucky at this point. As a Kentucky fan, that would be a brutal beat for Kentucky administration. And quite frankly, if that was the hire, I wouldn't be shocked if the AD was shortly behind John Calipari in exiting. So, look, I think the question that I wanted to ask both to you and to Rick that we didn't have time for, I think Kentucky fans today, when we look back at people like Rick Pitino and Tubby Smith, and we think really highly of them, and some people actually think that Kentucky moved on from Tubby Smith too soon. The question is, what is John Calipari's legacy going to be at Kentucky, right? We're talking about a guy who won a national title, who went to Final Fours, but really didn't get it done the last 3 or 4 years. Is his legacy going to be that he brought that program back from the Billy Gillispie era? Is his legacy going to be, oh, well, he was too focused on the one and dones? He had 50 NBA players in 15 years because all he did was recruit one and dones. It'll be really interesting as a Kentucky fan personally to see when we revisit this 5, 10, 15 years down the road, what is his legacy? I think a big piece of that is going to be, what does he do at Arkansas? Even though it should have no bearing on his legacy at Kentucky. I think if people see him leave and go to Arkansas and fail, I think that changes the perception of his legacy at Kentucky versus if he goes to Arkansas and builds yet another powerhouse contender every year. So we're in a very interesting time with college athletics as a whole. And this just goes to show, $8 million is more than enough to keep a family happy. And he's reportedly taken $1 million pay cut to go to Arkansas from Kentucky. But it's a very interesting time, and it'll be a very interesting and telling time for Mitch Barnhart in what he's able to accomplish here with this head coaching search.
I think it also matters, what does Kentucky do post Calipari? I think that's going to matter a lot too. But this is a situation where Kentucky cannot screw this up. If they screw this up and Calipari gets Arkansas rolling, like I think he will, they're going to look really, really bad in a couple years. They're going to get crushed. They'll get crushed by people that right now say they're doing the right thing. People will flip on it. It's the nature of it. But I think Calipari, man, he's going to be so motivated at Arkansas right now, and a motivated John Calipari is definitely dangerous.
What'll be interesting for me to see, and the committee will tell you that they don't do this, obviously, but we're bound to get a Kentucky versus Arkansas first or second round matchup in the next 3 years, right? In the NCAA tournament. There's not a doubt in my mind that the committee is going to set up the bracket in a way that Kentucky and Arkansas meet in a meaningful, probably second weekend game in the very near future, just for those storylines. And then what a storyline it would be if both of the programs are able to make a national championship and play against each other. Can you imagine the ratings for something like that if Kentucky plays Arkansas in a national championship game in 3 years? But again, we could also be looking at Kentucky or Arkansas, both being, basement programs in the next 3 to 5 years. So much is unknown. It's really hard to navigate that. But before we move off of college basketball, I know we're going to transition back to the Reds for a little bit before we wrap up the show. Just a quick shout out. I don't even know who he is. I'm going to be blatantly honest with you. I've never heard this name before in my life, even though I'm in the chat all the time. Shout out to Joey Mays for winning the Chatterbox Sports Bracket Challenge on ESPN. 117 entries, and Joey Mays coming out on top, winning the whole thing. Nick, where'd you finish?
If Purdue would have won, I think I would have finished third because I was one of 3 people that picked Purdue. I think I had the worst bracket though of anyone that picked Purdue. So I don't know where I finished. It was not pretty.
Okay.
It was a rough bracket. At least it was a better betting March though. I had a successful betting of the tournament. So the actual money came in okay. Stumbled a little bit at the end, but it is what it is. It thanks you for bringing up the bracket challenge winner. Shout out to Joey. It's funny. It kind of just goes to like a point that there's a lot of people that consume Chatterbox Sports content that isn't in the chat. We certainly appreciate everyone that's in the chat, but there's a lot of people that we don't know. So shout out to you. If you don't jump in the chat or, we don't even interact in the Discord or on Twitter, we do appreciate you all just as much. And shout out to Joey on winning. All right. We're going to just take some Reds questions here for the rest of the show. Because I don't really have a whole lot else. I can't believe we talked about college basketball as long as we did. That's awesome. I enjoyed it. I hope you did. Good question right off the bat from Ohio Lakers 513. Do you agree with Elly batting 6th? I'll start this one off, Craig. I want Elly De La Cruz to eventually be a leadoff hitter. I just think I want him getting the most at-bats. I want him getting maybe some cheap pitches early when a pitcher's trying to find the strike zone. Maybe you see a fastball. How many times do we see a pitcher take him a little bit to settle in? I don't mind though, kind of giving Elly right now. It feels like he's getting the 2023 Will Benson treatment, where you're putting him down lower in the lineup. You're trying to take some pressure off of him, and it clearly was successful for Will Benson. Whether people want to give David Bell credit for that or not, so I don't have an issue with it right now. But I do eventually want to see him batting leadoff.
Well, I think we can all agree that nobody's going to give David Bell credit, even if he deserves it. So that's a good point. But here's what I'll say. I don't mind Elly hitting 6th. I'll start by saying that. My issue since opening day has been that there's been no protection behind Elly, right? So with a guy who has the chase rate that Elly has, who has been striking out 30% of the time going into last night. I don't know what that number sits at today, but was striking out a lot, chasing bad pitches out of the zone while also watching pitches right down the middle. I think I struggle because pitchers were able to pitch around him and still get him out because there was no fear of what was behind him. I think ultimately one of Elly's biggest tools, as we all know, is his legs, right? And if he gets on base, he can create chaos. But you can only do so much. Outside of that one time where he stole second, third, and home. But nonetheless, I digress. For me personally, even if you left him in the 6th hole, I'd be okay with that. But I'd really like to see a bat behind him. Opening day, they had Spencer Steer in the 7 hole behind him. I think, having a 1-2 punch like Elly and then Steer really put some fear into the opposing pitching staff and makes the opposing manager really think through his moves. So from my perspective, I don't really care where he hits in the lineup. I just wish that he was more protected to ensure that he was getting some of those pitches like you were mentioning. That would be nice if he could kind of see some good pitches down the middle and take advantage of them like he did last night.
All right, we got a question from Mark. Good player props to bet on tonight for the Reds game. So this is not going to be sexy, but walks. Walks are the bet to take. Joe Ross walked 5 batters in his first game. It's only his second game back in like 2 years. He missed a ton of time. So walks are the way to go. I use a site called Ballpark Pal. That is really great. They unfortunately make you subscribe, so pay $10 a month for it now, but I think it's well worth it. India, Benson are the top two guys. Candelario is rated surprisingly high. I think he'd be a good one. Elly's rated pretty high. Pretty much anyone except Fraley and Strand are good players, I think, to take a walk. Well, the other prop that I see a lot that I think there's some value in is stolen bases for guys like India and Steer, because they steal more bases than a lot of people think they do, and Fraley too. Fraley as well. So especially if those guys have a high probability of walking, stolen base also I think is a good. So those would probably be the two that I would attack. Put you on the spot, Craig. You got anything?
No, I'm not gonna act like I do. It is way too early in the morning for me to really have any insight into player props yet. I will, like you said, I'll jump on the walks bandwagon. I think not only does the pitcher give up a lot of walks, but the Reds seem to be working a lot of walks this year, which has been a change in a approach. So, yeah, the other one I would maybe I don't know what the line is sitting at, obviously, but Brewers run total, I would take the under. I think Montas has been really, really good this year. I expect that line's going to be a little bit higher given the way this series and their season has gone. But I actually wouldn't be shocked to see them go under. I don't know. That line's probably sitting at 4.5 or 5.5, if not higher. So Nick will pull it up for me real quick and tell me. But let's go Brewers under run total.
I think that Ballpark Pal is only projecting them 3.89 runs. So I think you're probably on there. Trying to find the actual the minus 125 under 4.5. So yeah, I think that's a solid play. Especially if you could find it maybe on another book for a little better juice there. So yeah, I'm in on that. Stuart Fairchild batting leadoff. Ohio Lakers. He's got all the batting lineup questions, but he knows I care so deeply about where guys bat the lineup. I mean, against a lefty, if you don't have India in the lineup, I mean, I guess really who would be the other option, right? I mean, I wouldn't be against just batting Steer leadoff, just to have your best hitter against left-handed pitching batting leadoff, but Candelario is maybe an option. He's not a conventional leadoff hitter by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think there's another real option right now. And so I liked it. Stu walked twice. He seemed to embrace the batting leadoff. So yeah, I support that if India's out of lineup, but India's your leadoff hitter right now. I don't think there's really any question about it.
Why are we spending time on this? India got scratched. Lakers. He was in the lineup as the starter in the leadoff spot. He got scratched. Somebody had to slot in. It happened to be Stu. He's not your long-term leadoff guy, but things happen, man. Things happen.
Would you temporarily move CES down in the lineup from Steve Ross? I talked about this a little bit on Chatterbox Reds. I would not. I think maybe you can question whether he should have been batting third to start the year, but I just think this early in the season, we're 10 games into the season. If you were looking at some of the player statistics, you would have saw that Elly De La Cruz, after one game, moved up to a 297 batting average and a 971 OPS literally in one game. So that's how quickly things can change. I just think moving him down the lineup after you've batted him third over and over and over again, I don't think it really sends the right message, puts the confidence. I know Charlie did talk about it earlier, said tonight would maybe be the night when you're finally facing a right-handed pitcher. But me personally, I would ride it out a little bit longer before I made a move. And it's more because of how David Bell uses his lineups. Like, if David Bell was a guy that changes lineups every other day, then sure, you can move him up and down. But David Bell's been a guy that's put up pretty set lineups, at least over the last couple years. And if you're a set lineup guy, you got to stick to it, in my opinion.
Well, my opinion is that regardless of what David Bell decides to do, is that Reds fans aren't going to like it. So I think we can all agree on that. Because here's the thing. if you let's say that David Bell leaves CES in the 3 spot, right? Fans are going to be upset. He's hitting 136, blah blah blah, striking out too much. But he's making good contact, right? All right, let's move him down in the order. Who's your number 3 hitter now? Candelario, because we know Reds fans won't be happy with that either. He's hitting 184. Like, I just don't think that there's a move that necessitates moving CES out of that spot, quite frankly. I think he's hitting the ball hard. He's just hitting the ball right to the third baseman every time, it feels like. So I would probably ride it out a little bit longer, see if he can't get some air under the ball. We saw what he can do when he gets air under the ball a couple of games ago with that walk-off home run. So, okay. So the chat says move Steer to the 3 hole. Okay. So are you moving CES to the 2? If not, who are you moving to the 2 hole, and where do you move CES? Like, there's a lot more to it. And also, why are you messing with Spencer Steer when he's hitting so well right now? Why are you going to move him? I mean, if guys are comfortable in the role that they're playing, like, let them play that role. And Sean Connor, we're 10 games in. So let's RELAX.
Well, and I think the most important thing about the lineup and the structure is that you balance it out. You cannot have 3 straight lefties batting. You will just get completely exposed. The Reds lefties do not hit left-handed pitching well, whether you think they should be a platoon or not. You're not putting them in the best spot if you're having 3 of them in a row. You're just making it so easy on your opponent's manager if you bat them. So you have to have some balance. And I think CES batting third, I think David Bell's thing going into the year was more about the balance than really anything else. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see as this kind of plays itself out. But nonetheless, it's good to see. Good to see the Reds playing overall well. We do have to mention, though, Greg, I don't know if you saw this late last night. The Chicago Cubs were up 8-0 at Petco Park, and they ended up losing the game 9-8. I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen a team blow a lead like that. Just a really tough situation out in Chicago.
The Reds would never blow a lead like that, would they?
Never. Not the 2024 Reds.
No, look, I mean, the Padres battled back, and Fernando Tatis hit that go-ahead home run at the end of the game, and the Cubs weren't able to battle back. I seem to remember the Reds giving up a big lead, and then continuing to battle. Right, like that Pirates game last year. We gave up that 9-run lead, but then they continued to battle. They scored 3 or 4 more runs. I think it ended up being like 13-12 or something at the end of the game. But like the Reds kept battling. Can't say that for the Cubs. The Cubs gave up. They gave up the comeback and then didn't even like put up an effort. The last couple innings, just nothing.
I think the Reds hit a inside the park home run. I mean, that's just kind of the effort that they were showing late in the game. But let's talk a little bit about the NL Central as a whole. Obviously, the Pirates are just off to an incredible start. I was high on the Pirates coming into the year. I will say, though, if there was one team that I'd want to be 9-2 on April 9th and have the Reds be 2.5 games behind, it is the Pittsburgh Pirates. As much as I was high on that team, that's a team that doesn't scare me as much being up there. But, man, they are just off to an incredible start. Not all smoke and mirrors, too. They have a plus 21 run differential. They're 3-1 at home. They're 6-1 on the road. I mean, that's really impressive. That lineup top to bottom is pretty good. I mean, they have a pretty stacked lineup. I don't know about their pitching over 162. I think that's where the Reds can really separate themselves from the Pirates. But that team's off to a great start. Obviously, the Brewers are off to a great start up until last night. The Cubs were playing really well up until last night. And the Cardinals, I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea what to make of that team. If you told me that team is going to lose 90 games, I'd be like, okay. If you tell me that team's going to win 90 games, I'd be like, okay, I really have no pulse whatsoever on that team. They're a very, very weird team.
I think the Pirates are doing what Reds fans wish the Reds had done early in their year. They start their season with a 4-game sweep of the Miami Marlins, right? So Reds fans coming into this year were really hoping that the Reds would get off to a strong start, sweep the Nationals. It didn't happen. The Pirates are doing what they should, right? So they come in, they start the season with a 4-game sweep of the Marlins where they score over those 4 games, they score 31 runs, right? They're averaging 7 or 8 runs a game during that four-game stretch. And then they continue it with the Nationals, right? So their first 7 games, they go 6-1 on the road against the Marlins and the Nationals, and they take care of business and do what they're supposed to do. But then you get to a point in their schedule where thinking that, okay, well, now it's time to see them come back to earth, right? Where they're playing against the Orioles. Well, what do they do against the Orioles? They lose game 1, but they come back and they win the next 2. 5-4 on Saturday and then 3-2 on Sunday. And now they have a quick 2-game series against the Tigers. They win last night 7-4. But now we're going to get into a period where we really get a little bit of a better insight into them. They now have today against the against the Tigers to wrap up that quick 2-game series this afternoon. But then they go to Philly. And I think if Philly can continue to hit the way that they started to against the Reds, that'll be a telling task for them. And then they go to New York, and then they get a little, with the Mets and and then the Red Sox. But then they go Brewers and Giants after that. So their schedule is similar to the Reds' first month, where, quite frankly, you should be kind of building up that lead. The schedule is not exactly super difficult for the Pirates right now. So they're doing what they're supposed to do. And I think a lot of Reds fans wish that the Reds would do that as well and just take care of business.
One thing people, I think, should remember, the Reds are off to a great start. 6-4 is a great start. That is .600 baseball. That would be the 3rd best record in the National League over 162 games last year. The Brewers, who ran away with the NL Central with 92 wins, that's a .568 win percentage. So 6-4 is a great start. It's just the Pirates being 9-2 doesn't make it feel as great. And you played some weaker teams, but you never apologize for going 6-4. You never apologize for going 5-4, in my opinion. But the Reds are off to a good start. They needed to get off to a good start, as we know, as they do have a really tough schedule here coming up. Hopefully they can just absolutely beat up on the White Sox this weekend. That's a pretty bad baseball team, but we shall see. Craig, any final parting thoughts? We made it all the way till noon. I didn't know if we would. We found a way. What's your final thoughts today?
We found a way. What a well-rounded show today was, Nick. What a well-rounded show. We talk Reds baseball at length. We talk college basketball at length. We fit in some NFL conversation with Charlie. We have the GOAT on the show with Charlie Goldsmith. I mean, pretty solid Tuesday off the bench, if you ask me, especially something that came together a little last minute. Pretty good show. Pretty good show, Kirby. Well done, sir.
Rick is elite too. Rick is a hell of a guest. I mean, his just wealth of knowledge. Like, you bring him on to talk Xavier and NKU, and he barely even touched on either one of those teams. He's so good. He's so knowledgeable about college basketball as a whole. So I really just love getting his perspective on the Kentucky situation and college basketball as a whole. Well, if you're wondering why the hell Nick and Craig were on for the last 2 hours, the fellas, they are broadcasting at Prasco Park Day, the Joe Nuxall Classic. If you're in the Cincinnati area, go up and check out that event. Really cool. I think it starts at 1 o'clock is the first game. Wright State taking on Miami. And then I think UC and Xavier play the second game. So they're doing that. You can watch it on chatterboxsports.com. It is behind a paywall, the Joe Nuxall Classic, but you can check that out. Paul Fritchner, I think, is calling one of the games. Big League Paul. And the guys have been working really hard on that. So, yeah, I'm sure they'll talk all about that tomorrow on Off the Bench, talk about how that day went, and cool event and a cool opportunity for Chatterbox. Chatterbox Reds, of course, will be live tonight. Chuck Walter will be hosting with me. Chuck's going to help us out a little bit this year. So, yeah, looking forward to Chuck. Hopefully we can have a little bit better of a result to talk about than we had on Chuck's first show last week. The only loss against the Phillies in that series, but looking forward to that. So, but again, thanks as always to everyone who tunes in to Off the Bench, to Chatterbox Reds. Be sure to check us out in podcast form. We will not be on 1410 today because I have no idea how they even do that. I don't know if I also don't know if Kenner and Kev is live today or not because they don't have a producer. So sorry, I don't know that information. But if you subscribe to Chatterbox Sports on YouTube, you hit the bell in the top right corner and you turn on notifications, you'll probably be better informed than I am most of the time. Craig, did you have one final thought?
Well, I just want to give the people what they want. The question was asked in Discord and in chat. Over your probably left shoulder, I'm going to say left shoulder. Nope, right shoulder. There's what appears to be a glass bottle with a red top. People are wanting to know what that bottle is. I don't know if you can see it behind you. It's underneath the pennant.
The Cincinnati Reds?
It looks like there's a Reds thing in front of it, and then there's like a tall glass bottle behind it.
It's a lava lamp.
Oh,
Wife got that for me. It's a Cincinnati Reds lava lamp. I try when I remember to turn it on for Chatterbox Reds when we have night shows. I feel like it's inappropriate to turn on a lava lamp at 11 a.m. It feels a little weird. But my son is absolutely obsessed with that. He loves it. He loves having it on. So yeah, my wife's got me a lot of cool things. I don't know. She also got me this other light that says live. It's got a microphone on it. So she's really helped make my little studio a little more studio-esque. So shout out to my wife, and yeah, seriously, shout out to my wife for all that she does to allow anything that I do here with Chatterbox Sports to happen. So
I think we've given her
right.
praise in the past, but shout out to Andrea for sure. The amount of time, I think I speak on behalf of everybody in the chat, but the amount of time, effort, and energy that you put into Chatterbox Reds and your coverage of the Reds overall, and then obviously Chatterbox now as a full-time employee is extremely appreciated by everybody, and certainly wouldn't be possible without Andrea's support, helping out with the kids, and so shout out to her. Andrea and I have been friends for as long as I think we've had this conversation before, but like I legitimately don't know who I met first. I don't know. Andrea and I went to college together. Yeah, Andrea and I went to college together. Nick and I met each other through a mutual friend. We were in each other's weddings. The mutual friend was my best man. But yeah, just shout out to Andrea. Always been that kind of motherly presence, but certainly been a real savior when it comes to Nick being able to pursue the passion that is the Cincinnati Reds.
And shout out to you, Craig, for all your help here at Chatterbox Sports. You've been a huge addition and a huge help to kind of help do these shows today. There's no way I would have even attempted to do a show by myself today with about 10 minutes notice. I'm just kidding, not 10 minutes. I had about 10 hours. But yeah, no, thanks, Craig. This has been great doing this with you. And I love that we could do this stuff because it helps us stay connected more than two dudes would be able to stay connected, just kind of, being with the distance. But I appreciate you as well, Craig.
It's always a
All
pleasure.
Right, let's end this. I got stuff to do. We got Reds baseball to get prepared for tonight. Let's see if the Reds can take two in a row from the Brewers. Have a great day, everyone. I don't know how else to end the show other than